right, hello everyone. Welcome, happy International Women's Day. We're gonna get started in just a minute or so. I know we probably have a lot of New Mexico people here, but we would love to hear where you are watching from in the chat so we see where you all are from. Oh, Portland, Oregon. Hello. Oh, Cape Cod, how nice. Hi, everybody. Barcelona, hello. Oh, West Virginia, my home state. Hello, everybody. Hi, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. I saw Germany go by. Peru, Santa Fe, lots of Santa Fe. We love it.
Yes, definitely saw some New Mexico folks flash by.
Yes. And then some local DMV people from the East Coast. Hello. Hi, everybody. Great. We'll give it one more minute while people still come in. Hi, everybody. From Hawaii, that's nice. Hi. All right. I think we're good to get started. If Pita and Katrina, you are good. All right, great. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Oh, I'm a little echoey, so can you all hear me? Okay, great. My name is Carolyn Higgins, and I am the Senior Membership Manager at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And I just want to welcome you all and thank you for being a part of our International Women's Day celebration. We at NMWA champion women through the arts every day, as the O'Keeffe Museum does as well. So we are so happy to have a great partnership program with the O'Keeffe Museum. We have partnered with them in the past. Some of you might have come to our Georgia O'Keeffe happy hour birthday celebration, which was a lot of fun. And we really love working with our sister organization who also celebrates one of the greatest women artists, but also supports women artists through many of their programs and their exhibitions as well. So we're so happy to have Pita and Katrina here with us today, as well as everyone watching. So I am going to just introduce Katrina and then I'm going to disappear and let these two amazing women have a conversation. So let me just make sure I have my notes. All right, well, I'm going to introduce Katrina A. Latka, who has been a museum educator and guest advocate for over 20 years. Formerly of the Worcester Art Museum in Worcester, Massachusetts. She received her MA in Museum Education from the Rhode Island School of Design and BA in Studio Art and Anthropology from the University of Massachusetts. In her role at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, she directs education and interpretation. Each day she works to position the museum as a vibrant center for self-discovery, dialogue, and learning. She has worked on a multitude of collaborative projects, including curating fine art exhibitions, management of large-scale mural installations, storyboarding interpretive technology and video, and collaborating on many community art exhibitions. She has worked to develop accessible in-gallery and online interpretive materials such as bilingual family guides and labeling initiatives, creative audio installations, touchable interactives, and cross-state and cross-discipline curriculum partnerships. So I am going to pass it over to Katrina. Thank you for being here.
Great, Carolyn, thank you so much for that incredible introduction. I have the honor of interviewing wonderful Pita Lopez, who has worked with Georgia O'Keeffe. We have some questions to ask you today, and we also have some questions that have come in from our audience. So thank you for being here with us, Pita. First of all, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how your family became involved in working with Georgia O'Keeffe. And Carolyn has some slides to show along with our talk today.
I started working with for Miss O'Keeffe actually in 1974, but I had a long connection. My grandfather, Stephen Suazo, my mother's father, began working for her probably around sometime in the 1950s. Of course, she had moved to Abiquiu in 1949. My mother, in turn, began working for her around 1971, 72 as one of her housekeepers and cooks after her previous one had retired. And so it's been a long family connection. I also have my brothers who had worked for her, and a couple still continue to do so today. My brothers started working in the garden, helping my grandfather when they were still in high school and much younger. And then later, they came to work for her and continued on. And now we're with the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum since 2006. So we've had 40 plus years of being on the house and property. When I started working in 1974, I started working as a companion. Miss O'Keeffe at this time was going through her macular degeneration. And though she was very independent, she understood that sometimes she might need help. And she couldn't be in the house by herself with her two chows. She lived alone when regular staff was in here. And so when I started in 1974, I only worked on weekends or evenings, and then we would leave the next morning. But when I started working for her, I think she knew a little bit more about me than I knew about her. I knew she was a famous artist. I could recognize some of her artwork, but I honestly didn't know who she was. And, but I think in talking to my mother, she knew what we were all doing and what was going on in our lives. She always respected my mother and wanted to make sure she was fine, and as was the family.
Carolyn, I wonder if you can go to the next image. There's a great photo of Esteban. First, of course, an image of Miss O'Keeffe.
Well, of course, Miss O'Keeffe was much older than that image when I started working for her. She was already 87 years old. This photo is of my grandfather with the chows, and the other one is my grandfather and my mother. Of course, my mother was his daughter. And my grandfather really enjoyed working here. I think he admired Miss O'Keeffe extensively. However, when he went home, and this was before I started working for her, he would bring the stories about what the old woman was telling him to do. You have to understand, my grandfather was old school. He came from an era where women didn't tell men what to do. Yet Miss O'Keeffe, through her independence, always wanted to know, always knew what she wanted. And therefore, it didn't quite suit into his style, and he would bring this complaints home. So when I started working for her, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. My mother's reaction was a total opposite. And but they got along famously. There's many stories between Miss O'Keeffe and my grandfather and the little battles that they had. Even she, when he died in 1982 at the age of 81, would tell me about how they would battle each year as to how the garden was going to be planted, because he wanted it one way and she required that it be another way. But when he died, she wrote a little tribute to him, and part of it was, he was part of the house. Things got done quietly. If the work of the world was done as he did his, the world would be all right. I'm not quite sure he she thought that of him, but they understood each other and of course worked for many, many years together.
I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what your first day was like working with Miss O'Keefe.
Well, I started in December of 1974, and I remember coming. Of course, my mother had prepared me a little bit, and she sort of gave me what Miss O'Keefe liked and didn't like. But I think what kept us working well together was that she was not a very talkative person. And I was extremely shy, so I really didn't say much. And I did understand that she didn't like to be bothered, and she liked those that worked for her to be busy. However, I had the ins when I started as a companion, because Miss O'Keefe asked me to do something that I really had never done or wasn't quite sure. I just called my mother, and my mother would take me through that topic or show me where things were or how to prepare something in the kitchen. So it all worked well.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what your daily tasks were like? So what were some of the things that you might have learned in your role with her?
Well, as a companion between 74 and 78, our daily tasks were busy, but sort of simple. We would come in an afternoon, whether it was a weekday or through a weekend, would be Friday afternoon, and we would prepare supper for her. Most of the time it was simple. Her diet was very natural and what today would be called a good diet. Supper was light, soup and salad or some leftovers from lunch. And then you'd clean up the kitchen, do the dishes. And then if it was a nice evening, take a walk with Miss O'Keefe, whether it was at her Abiquiu house or her Ghost Ranch house. And then we would come into the studio because her bedroom was located there. And in those later years, she spent most of her time in there, though she did come into the other parts of the house. And we would read. As she got to know me, we might do correspondence. But she retired early. I would say by 8 o'clock, she was ready to go to bed. And I'd help prepare her for bed. And we would read. As companions, we read quite a bit to her, and it varied. We would take things out of her library, her book room, and it may be some books that she had already read, like the classics. Friends would occasionally send her books that they enjoyed and they thought she would as well, and we might read those. She would also sometimes, I love novels, I love mysteries. And so if I found a book that she would like, maybe we'd read that. And we would read until you could see her eyes were closed, or she'd tell you she was ready to fall asleep. I remember one evening reading to her, and my voice was cracking by the time that I thought she was asleep. Her breathing was gentle and she'd been with her eyes closed for a while. So I got up, moved out of her bedroom, turned off the light. And just as I was about to step out, she said, "Yoo-hoo, I wasn't asleep." And so I came back, turned the light back on and continued reading. But I think understanding that I must have been tired or something that evening, she said, "I'm ready to fall asleep now." And that was my excuse to go out. And then the next morning, we'd get up really early in the morning. We slept, you'll see an image of her studio soon. And we slept on the daybed in the studio, and we would, here's a photo of one of my brothers and myself, but we would probably be awoken by her dogs between 5 and 5:30, and we'd let them out. But we knew better than to go back to bed, because soon after, Miss O'Keefe herself would be getting up. So you'd make the bed, get dressed, go into the kitchen area and get the dogs fed and put water on the stove for coffee. You'd go back, finish helping Miss O'Keefe get ready for the day, and take a morning walk. And we would walk and then come in for breakfast. And that could be anywhere between 6:30 and 7. And then you'd start the day. And there was no set schedule for the day. Miss O'Keefe sort of took each day as it came. The dogs, of course, in Abiquiu really didn't get to walk around much. She kept them within the compound for fear that they'd get run over if they went into the pueblo. But at Ghost Ranch, the dogs would also go with us on walks and move around. So it was really fun. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the morning, if you weren't working the day, you would just go home or do your own day. And but if you stayed on a weekend, she would tell you what she wanted you to do.
I wonder, Carolyn, if you can flip to the next image.
Okay. This is my other brother, Mino. Mino, as many of you might know through reading, assisted Miss O'Keefe with some of her art. He was very patient. Here we are working on some of her art in storage, preparing it for storage or review. I don't remember which.
And then the next image, please.
Of course, this is Miss O'Keefe's Abiquiu house. You see this large driveway coming into the house. Her studio is the building to the right, and we come out the big doors that you see there. And this would be Miss O'Keefe's pathway when she was in Abiquiu. So this is where we'd take that morning or evening walk. She'd make this large circle coming one way. And in front of that window that you see there, there's a ledge. And every walk around, she would mark. So we'd go in one direction, mark it with the stone, and then going the opposite direction and mark it with the stone. I would say by the time we had 8 to 10 rocks on that ledge, she was ready to go inside. She was an avid walker.
Katrina, just real quick, did I accidentally skip one that I need to go back to?
Well,
No, I think
sure, there's a lovely image of Miss O'Keefe if we wanted to just go back.
Okay.
yeah, the one with the corn.
Sorry, I might go forward one. It's this one?
There.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
That's Miss O'Keefe within her garden. She really enjoyed going out there. My grandfather would take care of that for her. And there's a lot of photographs where she herself is also working in the garden or picking certain produce from it. Even after her eyesight, her central vision was lost to macular degeneration, she had paths built in the garden so that she'd be able to go out there. And because of the stark white of these paths that didn't have any greenery, she was able to stay on them and look at the garden with her peripheral vision. She used her peripheral vision very strongly.
Pita, you spoke quite a bit about O'Keeffe's chow dogs and so many of the images that O'Keeffe herself took, photographs she took of these dogs. You know, she loved them so very much. We did have a question from a member of the public who had asked specifically about interactions between the dogs and members of the Abiquiu community, that it seemed like so many people had interactions in one way or another with those dogs. Can you speak to whether or not that was true?
It probably was. I don't recall any specific situations, but she did love her dogs. She called them her little people. And she said she got her first two set of chows from a friend who lived in Sapeo, New Mexico, just a little bit outside of Las Vegas. She said he had come to visit her one day and brought this box of two black clouds. And those were her first two chow puppies. And this was sometime in the 1950s. And she had a pair up beyond her death. But I know that when Miss O'Keeffe first had the chows, she used to proudly say how they'd go into the village and they were sort of the lead dogs in the community. And but during one turn, one of her chows was hit by a vehicle. It didn't die, but she was really concerned. And I would imagine with the dogs running around the village that somebody probably ran into them, and they must have looked like little bears. But then she enclosed the compound around the house, giving them enough space to move around and play around and not go into town. Though once in a while, I remember even I myself would go out and look for them because they dig under the fence or jump the wall and they'd be out in the community again, until those dogs passed away and she got new ones. And of course, they learned to stay within the compound. So that worked well. I became Miss O'Keeffe's secretary in 1978 until she died in March of 1986. And we worked on correspondence. And I got to learn so much from her. I learned how her artwork, how she wanted her artwork represented, how to handle the art. I worked on transcription of her monograph. I traveled with her. I did so many things, I think, in that short time that I never would have if I had not worked for Georgia O'Keeffe. And she made you feel that you could do anything you wanted to. It just took hard work and patience. I learned to be organized. I learned that you really didn't need things in your life to make your life better. And as she was extremely independent, that sort of got to rub off on you. Everything she did was so impressive, and always an educator. She enjoyed teaching you things or putting things in your way that taught you something.
Did you get to watch her work? What was she like as a person?
I saw her work. She didn't have a schedule. And of course, by the time I saw her work, she had was working with the larger paintings with Mino's help. She did some watercolors and charcoals on the table in her studio when I was working there. And she also did some other things around the house, oils. And she was, she knew exactly what she wanted. When Mino would help her, I could see that she sort of would tell him what she wanted done. He might mix the paints for her and might give her the brush, so that she could put whatever was in her mind on paper. And I did see that. And the issue with her eyesight was a controversy at the time, but she would tell people that, you know, getting assistance was like, you know, having a new brush, or it was a tool that she needed just to stay working. And even at that point, there's a painting that's on the viewing here, where I recall I was at her desk in the studio. That's where part of her office was. And she went into the bedroom with a sketch pad, closed the door behind her. And I didn't see her for a while, but when she came out, she had these 3 beautiful drawings of a juniper and the Abiquiu mesa that you can see outside her bedroom window. And it was at a time that people were saying, oh, she doesn't do anything on her own. I was so proud of her. I wish I had been able to at that time videotape it, or just show somebody and say, you know, this is what she did on her own. The 3 sketches that she did are Mesa and Branch, and they're right outside her window.
And I think we do have an image of that. Carolyn, if you could advance a bit. So here's an image of the Abiquiu House studio.
Yes, and that's the daybed where we used to sleep as companions.
And then next.
The next one, that one. This was the set that she created by herself in her bedroom on that day that she amazed me.
Beautiful. So Pita, you also continue to be a resident of the Abiquiu community, which is the place where O'Keeffe's home is situated here in northern New Mexico. Can you speak from your personal experience how her presence impacted the residents of New Mexico, such as yourself?
Well, even before my working with her or growing up, we used to hear stories from people throughout the community, because at some point they either worked for her or they ran into her in the village when she was taking walks. And some would say that they didn't know what to make of her, especially when she first arrived. She was all dressed in black, and she would pick up rocks and would do things that women normally didn't do. And they didn't know what to make of her. But through time, they got to know her. Of course, as people started working here, it worked out really well, because they would take these stories out into the community. And as children, we didn't come to her house. We understood that she didn't like to be bothered, but she did befriend some teenagers early on, and was always a great donor to many activities that the children were doing in Abiquiu. They might have play baseball, or they may have a basketball team, whether it was through the schools or just within the community. And if they needed suits, if they needed balls, she would always donate that. Of course, we didn't normally come to visit as children, even though for us, you know, my grandfather and our mother was here, but we used to have this tradition that for Christmas, you would get treats. It was a little bag of an orange and some candies and some nuts, and that you would come in to Miss O'Keeffe's house, and she always had the treats for the kids. Normally you didn't see her. They came from her housekeeper at the kitchen door. But, and as time went on, she became part of the community. People understood she wanted her privacy, and they afforded her that. She was friends with several families in the community as well. And not only did she provide jobs, but she would attend weddings and baptisms and funerals when someone died. And that continued even for the last 2 years when she moved to Santa Fe. I would go in and greet her, and we'd talk, and she'd still ask what certain people that she remembered were doing, or their families, or I'd bring her the activities that were happening in Abiquiu, whether it was a fiesta or a wedding or a baptism. And she was always interested, though she mostly kept to herself.
Is there a way that you would like to see her historic homes change in the future? May that be through conservation efforts, through interpretation, maybe special programming, or something else entirely?
I'm not sure I'd like to see the house change all that much. The houses have become historic landmarks, both Abiquiu and Ghost Ranch, but I do see them improve through conservation by keeping the structure and conditions safe for future generations that are interested in knowing Georgia O'Keeffe and who she was and what she was about. I'm glad the museum constantly works on documentation and conservation of the properties, on its long-term preservation. The interpretive efforts of the education team and the interpretive team also allow our visitors to know what her life was like. And coming to the property allows visitors to see exactly how she lived. As extravagant as she could have been, the simplicity of her life was what made her who she was. And that you can envision when you come to her house. We're fortunate that many of the visitors that have come through have mentioned about how much they understand her life and even her artwork much better by being surrounded by exactly where she lived and where she walked and everything that she did here. She had such a long life that there's so many stories to tell and so many ways to convey them. And definitely through all these efforts, her home doesn't necessarily need to change, but it does entail, to have all these stories come out.
So I guess building on that, is there one thing or maybe even a few things that you wish visitors to Miss O'Keeffe's historic properties knew?
Well, she was extremely normal. Sometimes when we find somebody who's very famous, we think they're different than we are. And I think maybe that's why Miss O'Keeffe and I got along well, because she was a regular person. And the other thing I wish people would know was that she actually liked to laugh and smile a lot. We see all these photographs of her where she's so stern and serious, and those were mostly sittings for those photo shoots that she had done. But I'm glad that people get to come to her house and and see her surroundings and know that she was a regular person, and look in her pantry and see, how much she enjoyed food, and her gardens and how much she enjoyed the garden. And just the views out of her homes are fantastic. And so all these things tell visitors who she was as a person.
I love that. Yeah, that certainly visiting the historic properties has such a humanizing factor to seeing how someone lives. Well, our last questions actually all come from members of the public who submitted them in advance. One of them is, were there composers whose music O'Keeffe enjoyed more often? This person said, I can picture O'Keeffe sitting in her living room, listening to records playing on her stereo.
And that's true. Miss O'Keeffe had quite a vast stereo collection. And most of her albums were the 33 1/3, those old albums. But she had a wonderful system, a Macintosh stereo system, and wonderful speakers. While I worked with her, she mostly enjoyed classical music. Brahms, Mendelssohn, Bach, those were some of her favorite composers. But her collection was a variety of composers and a variety of music. And her album collection also included jazz and salsa music, and probably other things that I didn't even have the time to look into. She loved sitting in her sitting room, looking out the big windows out into the garden and listening to music. I also understand that sometimes when she worked, she had music on. And at Ghost Ranch, she would sometimes sit under the porch because Ghost Ranch was her summer home. We were able to have the windows open. And again, music would be playing while she'd be looking out into the Pedernal from under her portal.
Carolyn, I wonder if you can advance to the next slide.
That is
here, of course,
French Coast. And definitely, as you can see, the Pedernal is right there. And that's her southern view. The portal, the house is like a horseshoe shape with the portal facing the Pedernal. It's a beautiful, quiet space. The landscape is magnificent. If you see many of her Western landscapes from the area here, they are from Ghost Ranch.
Well, our next question actually bounces back to the other property, and in fact, the bomb shelter, the bunker there. How did O'Keeffe feel about the bunker down the hill during Pita's time with her? Did she use it for anything or keep it stocked for some emergency, to your knowledge?
Well, she would keep it stocked, or had it stocked for emergencies, I think. She never mentioned why she built the bunker. She said that a friend had suggested that she build it. And she understood we weren't far from Los Alamos. She had met Dr. Oppenheimer and Dr. Fermi when she was up at Ghost Ranch, and they were doing the Manhattan Project. They would sometimes go to Ghost Ranch and for some R&R, and that's where she got to meet them, and probably understood more of the project than she led on. And so the closeness of that, I think, might have been one of the factors. It was built by a local gentleman, she said, Art Sandoval, and it was built in the late 50s or very early 60s. I recall that during that period of time when I was in elementary school, we would have drills where we would either go under our desks or do something in case of an emergency. And so I think that might have been why she had it built. But I do remember that she had it well stocked. Mino and I went in with her at one point, and I'd never been in there. It has this zigzag hallway into the main room that's not very large. And she said that the zigzag was so that radiation wouldn't travel into the space. I guess radiation travels on a straight line. And when you have the zigzag, it can't go straight through. She did explain that. But she also, at the time, there were 4 Murphy beds in the room. And they all had mattresses that, of course, by that time were not any good. So those were removed and disposed of. But she also had canned goods that had been canned in her kitchen. She had boxes of bottled water and dog food. Now, the canned goods were spoiled totally. So those were eliminated and thrown away, as well as the dog food she had stored there, because her little people were going to be staying with her in that little space. She did leave the Geiger counter. There's a dial telephone. The box of the bottled water stayed, as did some toiletries. So it could be used for that, I suppose. There were some vents that would go outside for air. She had a water tank that's still there. I'm not quite sure how safe it would be, but she knew she had it and it was there. And I don't think after that cleaning it out, she ever went back. But through the years, we have had opportunities where we've been able to have visitors going to the fallout shelter.
Fascinating. We did have another question actually come in from the chat. Someone asked, can Pita tell us more about the photo of the camel behind your left shoulder? And then building on that question, did Miss O'Keefe talk about all of the places that she traveled into the late 50s and 60s, the Middle East, India, Asia, Mexico, and Japan?
She didn't talk about them all. She did talk about Japan and going to the different islands and how much she enjoyed that. She did talk a lot about her travels to Peru. She would go with Alexander Gerard and his wife into Mexico, Central and South America. And she was almost 70 years old when she went up to Machu Picchu. And she knew I was interested in Machu Picchu. So sometimes she would talk about how she got there and how much she enjoyed it and how much walking they had to do. So she, though she didn't say very much, as I said, she was not a very talkative person. I knew that she enjoyed traveling and doing all those things. And she really enjoyed it. I don't think there was a place she didn't go to that she didn't enjoy. And what we've also found is that many of these places, like in Ireland and other places in Europe, she would bring mementos with her. In our book room, in her book room, she had little boxes, stationary boxes, where she had stored mementos from certain areas, whether it was labeled Spain or Germany. And she would have little brochures from the places that she stayed in, the airplane ticket or the train ticket that she might have used. But we also found linens that she had bought in certain areas, little things from, we have the Buddha's hand that she had also acquired during one of her travels. So she brought little mementos with her. Not a lot, because she didn't like a lot of things. And the images that you see behind me are actually just Xerox copies of photographs of places that she'd been to. You see her in Morocco on the camel, and at her Ghost Ranch house. So they're just little things that have come into me through the years, and I've sort of just tacked them on my wall.
It's great to have there. Another fan question. Did O'Keeffe comment on things happening in the world during that last decade or so of her life?
She didn't comment very much, but she was interested. I would sometimes have a newspaper if there was a current event that I knew she might be interested in, and we talk about that, or something on television. She never watched television, though. She had one at her Abiquiu house for her sister when she came to visit, because she liked the evening news, but Miss O'Keeffe didn't do that. But there were times that she got the New York Times, and we would read articles about what was going on in America at that time, or in Europe. I don't recall exactly what the topics were, but she did like knowing what was going on, and even locally. I remember one time driving her to Santa Fe, and I commented that the legislature had just changed the speed limit from 60 to 55 for energy conservation. We were having issues with oil at the time. And she just looked at me and she said, you know, I could drive as fast as I wanted to when I used to drive. It was kind of sweet, because to her, 55 was nothing new.
No. Okay, another question from the public. What made her happy in those later years? How much time did she spend walking in the landscape versus working in her studio in those later years, as she increasingly needed assistance?
Well, she still did quite a bit of walking. Of course, someone would always walk out with her, but she always seemed content in her life. She enjoyed being with the people that were around her. I think most of the people that were around her, she considered like family that she didn't have. She would walk outdoors to her garden in Santa Fe, sitting outside and listening to the birds or hearing the sounds of the day was enjoyable to her. She, as I said, didn't really have a schedule. So if she was inspired to work on any of her art, whether it was those later watercolors or clay work, she would just do so. There was no specific time, but all those things seemed to make her happy. And one thing that I remember clearly and still do today is, though she lived such a long life, I never once heard her say, I wish I had. It was almost as if she just did what she always wanted to do. And whatever consequences were there, they were there. She lived her life the way she wanted to live it. I remember she once told me that she had lived such a long life that sometimes she'd look at photographs of herself in the early years and in midlife, and she said, I know it's me, but it's almost as if I'm looking at someone else.
That's fascinating.
And as we age, that sort of becomes a fact,
That's true. That's
Yeah.
very true. One person writes, "Dear Pita, I've studied Miss O'Keeffe's fan mail and written about it. Can you talk about whether you read all of the fan letters to her or have read all of the fan letters to her when they arrived? If so, how did she respond? There are very few negative letters in the archive. Were any of the letters discarded?"
No, actually, her archive, most of her archive at that time has gone to the Beinecke Library at Yale University. And her fan mail was pretty positive. Very few did she respond to, but definitely we read everything that came in. And you're right, there honestly was not anything negative. Sometimes fans would want her signature, her autograph. They'd say, you know, I'm 10 years old and I collect autographs and I have so and so and so. May I have your autograph? And she did that. And up until a certain point, and then she stopped. But definitely all her mail was read to her. And it was fun to hear people of all ages say how much they enjoyed her work. They enjoyed her or seeing her, whether it was at an exhibition or some other event that she might have been in. She would go to concerts in Santa Fe for the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival. And she would visit friends where they might have had a dinner party or something, though she didn't stay very long.
And do you know if she was more comfortable at Ghost Ranch or Abiquiu, or did she like both homes equally?
I think she liked both homes equally, and they provided her a different aspect where the Ghost Ranch was her first home. It was freshly built. She bought that in 1940, and the house was built in 1933 to 35. And she loved the landscape up there. She loved how quiet it was. And in the later years, actually provided her quite a bit of the privacy that she enjoyed. But Abiquiu was her first home. It was a home that sort of, though she didn't build from the ground up, she almost did because it was a major ruin. And this was the home that she herself created. So they both afforded her different opportunities to create houses of her own.
Did she talk much about her husband, Alfred Stieglitz?
We didn't talk much about him. The only time that she gave me glimpses of him, we were reading correspondence between her and Mr. Stieglitz for a potential book of their correspondence. And someone had sent her copies of her letters and his letters, and they were transcribed, so they were just read. And I recall that sometimes she'd say how cranky he could be or how he enjoyed people, and sometimes it was annoying. But sort of just daily life things. I do recall the letters, and he could do a good 10 to 12 page letter, and hers were 1 page and shortened to the point. That was the difference in their lives. But his letters are fantastic because it gives you an idea of what life was like at that time. And he would write to her from the time he got out of bed till the time he went to bed at night and that evening. So they were interesting to read and learn from.
Pita, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and all of that history. We deeply appreciate this. Thank you so much for that insight.
Well, I appreciate being asked to join you, especially on this day. and it was fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carolyn, for having me, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it. I do enjoy sharing and being here for so long. It's a privilege and an honor to still talk about her. Great memories. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for participating. Pita, it's so wonderful to hear from you, especially when we come across these artists who are larger than life at this point. And so hearing about her just as the woman that she was is really amazing. So we thank you, and thank you for your work with her and being her companion. I love that, and just all of your stories. It was wonderful. And thank you, Katrina, for being a part of our day as well and leading us along.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, thank you all. You have a great rest of your day, and happy International Women's Day.
Same to you. Bye-bye, everyone.